Great. So here's the definition of PR that I like best. It's not a textbook definition. Advertising is when you come into the office the morning after your big date and you tell everybody how great you were. PR.
So Paul, welcome to the show. It's a real pleasure to have you.
Jason, thanks for having me, man. It's great to be here with you and your audience.
Yeah, I'm super excited to dive in because I love stories. And I love that that's what you love to talk about. I always love to have our guests talk a little bit about how they got to where they are today. So if you don't mind, paint us that picture. What was it like being Paul growing up? Where was that at? And sort of how did you get to where you're at today?
Well, there's a story. You'd be surprised by that, Jason. When I was a teenager, I was big into music, and I actually studied tuba, of all things. And I thought I'd become a classical musician. And at some point, my parents sat me down and explained to me that the life of most musicians is one of poverty and struggle, and that I should pick another career. So I fixed that. I chose the very lucrative career of newspaper journalism instead. And of course, most of your listeners, even if they don't follow journalism, know that that ain't very lucrative. However, it was very rewarding. I spent about 20 years as a journalist. Jason and I wrote probably about 10,000 stories and edited another 10,000 over the course of a 2-decade career. I covered everything from murders, city council, special investigations, the White House, Congress. 20,000 stories. That's a lot of beginnings, middles, and ends. You're with people in the best times of their lives and the worst times of their lives. You really learn about storytelling. I was editing a business journal here in Pittsburgh, where we're located, and my company was ready to promote me. They didn't know when or where. They just knew I'd be glad to go. And I decided maybe it was time to get off the merry-go-round. I asked a friend of mine who ran a PR firm to quietly help me look for something different to do. And he called me up one day, said he wouldn't help me. After a long pause, I figured we wrote something in the paper he didn't like. He said, "Aren't you going to ask me why not?" And I said, "Okay, Larry, why not?" He said, "Because I want you to come work for me." And that was my entry into the agency world, Jason. And that was at Ketchum Public Relations, the 5th largest PR agency in the world, 44 offices, 5,000 employees. It was like getting an advanced degree in marketing and PR. Mm-hmm. And that led me to start my own firm in 2002. And that built on everything I'd learned about storytelling and journalism and everything I learned about working with great brands on their stories at Ketchum. Brands like FedEx and Delta Airlines and Firestone and Rutgers University and Alcoa. So that combination of the passion for story and knowing that this is what companies really need to do, especially in the healthcare space, I'm sure we'll talk about that. That's how I got here.
Yeah, very fascinating. So what was that transition like for you? Was it a pretty easy one since you were already wanting to leave journalism? You kind of found that PR position. How long did you stay at that other firm out of curiosity?
4 years.
4 years? And then at some point you were like, okay, I think I can do this on my own. What was going through your mind at that time?
Well, I thought that I would go work for a company internally. In the PR world, as it used to be, there were 3 major players. The companies that had stories to tell, the agencies that help them tell those stories by connecting them to journalists and journalists. So I'd been at an agency, I'd been at a journalist. I thought I should work at a company. As I talked to my friends about that in the business community here in Pittsburgh, they all told me that was not a good idea. And when I asked them why, they said, because you should start your own firm. And if you did, I would hire you. And so in the beginning, I thought it was an accidental entrepreneur. I don't believe that today anymore. I know that this is what I was really meant to do. And I get jazzed by it every day.
Awesome. So stories, you love to talk about stories. You started us off with a good one. What are some of the things that healthcare professionals should know about these stories when it comes to, telling their business's story or their entrepreneurial story or just getting the word out there? What are some things that they're missing or that you think that they should know? Well,
we'll start with this. A new study came out this week from a big PR firm, global firm, the largest PR firm in the world, actually, Edelman. And it was about healthcare companies, their reputations, their brands. One of the findings in that study, Jason, was a survey of 225 healthcare investors, more than 68%. The survey was done in the UK, Canada, and the US. Between 68 and 72% of the investors said healthcare companies do a terrible job of communicating their value proposition to investors. That's just one audience. everybody in healthcare wants to be a caregiver. They want to be about saving lives. And, even if you are providing software in a medical suite or device management or devices, you're a part of that story. You can't all be telling the same story. We're all doing the same thing. Then nobody's different from anybody else. And the whole point of sharing your unique story, what we call your capital S story, is to stand out from everybody else. And that capital S story is our secret sauce. It's where our focus goes at our firm. I wrote a book about it. Capital S story, quite simply, is this, Jason. The story above all others, it gets a capital S. As business leaders, we tell stories all day long on a variety of topics. This one answers these questions: why somebody should buy from you, work for you, invest in you, or partner with you. And those are critical issues in healthcare today for a whole variety of reasons, regardless of where you land on the spectrum in terms of your organization and the specific kind of work you do.
Yeah, really good points there. So PR actually just came onto my radar fairly recently, just within the last few years. I was, obviously I'm a healthcare professional by training,
Yep.
so we don't get
Yes.
any marketing experience or exposure, really.
Right.
So this was fairly new to me, but I would love to hear your perspective. Like what is PR? And I'm sure the audience would too, because maybe they're not familiar. What is PR? What are the benefits of PR? And how does the story sort of play into the PR piece?
Great. So here's the definition of PR that I like best. It's not a textbook definition. Advertising is when you come into the office the morning after your big date and you tell everybody how great you were. PR is when you come into the office the morning after your big date and your date tells everybody how great you are. Now, the $10,000 definition of what I just described, it's called third-party validation, right? So in healthcare, probably most of your audience is more familiar with the concept of studies that validate efficacy of devices or drugs, right? Or treatment regimens, right? Well, that's third-party validation too. You find an independent university to go take a look at what your idea is, your solution, your product. That's what PR is too. It's getting your story out there in a way that somebody can look at it, somebody that you want to connect with and interact with, and they can say, this isn't just Paul telling me how great he is. This is independent verification that what Paul does is of value and I should consider working with him. Now, the second part of your question is, we're overwhelmed by digital clutter today. There's, before we do an interview like this, we have to turn off all our electronic devices, put them on do not disturb, because we're going to get hundreds of text messages, emails. We see billboards, signs, all kinds of stuff. How are we going to make sense? How are we going to break through the clutter of all that to communicate the value of our organizations? There's a one-word answer. An answer is story. Healthcare research, Jason, has shown over the last 20 years using functional MRIs and similar imaging tools that the brain is biologically hardwired for story. And I talk about this in my book. There was a study done about 10 years ago at Princeton by a researcher named Yuri Hassan. He had a young woman get inside one of these fMRI tubes and tell her worst prom date story. And it was a good story. I have it in my book. And then they did a double-blind study, and they took two groups of 30 people, and they had them listen to her story. If anybody's ever been inside one of those things, you got to listen to music or whatever. So instead, they were listening to this story, and they looked at the brainwave patterns. And what they saw was a well-shared story. The storyteller's brain and the listener's brain synced up in terms of their brain activity. Jason, that's only one study. There have been a number done since then that have validated and verified that this is how our brains work. We process complex information through narrative, through story. And that's really why we need to be sharing our stories in healthcare. We need to be sharing the value of what we do, right?
Yeah, really good points. And it kind of reminds me of some of the college professors that I've had, where some will just spout out all sorts of factual knowledge and information, and it's just like complete mind blown, overwhelmed, can't retain anything. But then you have like some of the best professors, and they will create a story. They will help you imagine or visualize exactly what and why and how, through their storytelling capabilities. And it makes a tremendous world of difference in terms of like how much you can retain if you have a good story. This sort of practice dates back thousands of years, right? Like if you look at the Bible,
Absolutely.
The Bible doesn't specifically say, live your life this way, full of like rules and stuff. It's all stories. And then those stories are easy to retain, easy to remember. You run into a situation like, oh, I remember that story. What was the lesson there? Okay, maybe I can apply that to my life, sort of thing. So yeah, really, really good point. Something I did not even think about until just really recently.
Yeah.
And
Well, if I could piggyback on your thought, here's an example that I frequently use. And this is what we do at our company. We work with our clients to identify what we call an archetypal story, one that's hardwired in our brains throughout human history, and align that with the specifics of the company that we're working with, right?
Mm-hmm.
So your features and benefits, which I hate those two words as terms to describe what a company does, but let's just call them that. You got to marry that with the archetypal story. And here's one from the Bible, David and Goliath. If I came to you, Jason, I said, we're working with a great new healthcare technology company. It's a David and Goliath story. You do not have to be a biblical scholar to know that that's the archetypal story is the underdog, the startup company that's taken on the big company. And that's the way that we need to communicate in healthcare. I mean, we can get lost in the statistics and the studies and the outcomes and the numbers. And what people really want to know is, how is this going to make things better? How will this treatment regimen, this drug, this technology, this software platform, how is it going to improve things? And story is the best way to communicate that value, and specifically that capital S story. Almost everything that's done in healthcare, there's a competitor for it. Even if it's doing nothing, right? Don't have this surgery or don't take this medicine. If you can tell the story why your life is going to be better or different, because of the unique value you bring to it as an organization, you're going to have the best success possible.
Now, I feel like some people might be thinking in their minds, okay, that sounds great, but I don't think I have like a super exciting, super easily rememberable story.
Right.
To those people, what would you say? And how would you sort of walk them through that framework of building that story based on their experiences or their brand that they're creating?
Yeah, that's really a great question. And I will say that the smarter you are, and there's a lot of smart people in healthcare, it becomes more difficult to see the forest for the trees. So what we do, we have a trademark process called story crafting that we use with our clients. It takes about 60 to 90 days to uncover and develop their unique story. One of the very first things we do, Jason, that directly responds to your question is this. We sit the leadership team down and we ask them individually to answer those 4 questions. Why would somebody buy from your company, work for your company, invest in your company, partner with your company? And when you get the different functional leads in the room together, you're going to get different answers. That's your raw material for your story. Now, bottom line on a personal level, founders, entrepreneurs, passionate innovators, researchers who are driving healthcare forward, what gets them out of bed in the morning? Why do they do what they're doing on a daily basis rather than taking an easier, softer path to try and achieve success? And that's the taproot right there. That's the well that we need to get into to find the uniqueness in the story.
Yeah, love it. Good stuff. And you mentioned that basically, PR is kind of taking that company or that person and connecting with, the agency who's in the middle with the journalist who's on the other end.
Yeah.
Can you describe that process and how like a good PR firm can help manage that sort of flow? Because it's all about the journalist, right? And it's all about where those journalists are publishing to in terms of getting your story out there to a big audience. How do you know if like the PR firm that you're working with has that process down smooth? I know some PR firms, they just go and submit to like, a press release thing and just blast it out to a million different news sites and rarely gets any traction. Other ones have like real relationships with journalists. Like how does that whole process work on the back end?
Yeah, that's a great question. So first, let's start with this. PR has fundamentally changed, and the changes in the news business are a big part of that. We practice a 21st century version of PR that can be abbreviated as peso, like the Mexican currency, but it's not the currency. That stands for paid, earned, shared, and owned. And with every healthcare client we work with, Jason, they need a mix of those 4 categories of content to have success.